Greetings! My name is Elizabeth DiSavino. I have written a book entitled Katherine Jackson French, Kentucky's Forgotten Ballad Collector, published through University Press of Kentucky. Delighted to be here with Carnegie on the couch, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the subject of my book, and then read you just a couple of short excerpts. Katherine Jackson was born in London, Kentucky in 1875. She earned a PhD from Columbia University in 1906 in English literature. She was not a run-of-the-mill woman. You may have already guessed that. The second chapter of her life included founding a very important women's department club in Shreveport, Louisiana. And in between, she found time to come home to London, Kentucky, and go into the mountains and collect ballads. Had she published, hers would have been the first large scholarly collection of Appalachian ballads ever published. And it probably would have given us a very different impression of early Appalachian balladry. So I'm going to read a little bit of her expedition into the mountains from the chapter entitled A Fortnight of Balladry. Jackson had studied medieval literary balladry while at Columbia University, so it was natural that she was intrigued by the idea of old ballads of the sung variety being kept alive in the Kentucky mountains. The ballads that Jackson's classmates told her about and that she eventually sought were descendants of the same ballads that Francis Child had collected in Great Britain and immortalized in the English and Scottish popular ballads. These songs left the Old World, sailed with immigrants to New England or Virginia, and then clambered over the mountains from East Virginia or Pennsylvania into Appalachia. These musical fables are old. Some date back to the 13th century, and as Ron Penn reminded me, give a sort of eternal window into issues of race, gender, class, power relationships, identity, and memory. We are fortunate to have the adventure of Jackson's 1909 ballad collecting trip detailed by Jackson herself in a manuscript entitled A Fortnight of Balladry. An abbreviated version of this was published as A Fortnight in Ballad Country in Mountain Life and Work in 1955, 3 years before her death. In both the manuscript and the published versions, she describes riding off at dawn in a wagon with a team of 3 mules and a companion named Lizane Napier, a carefree widow of 60. Lizane was to serve as Jackson's guide and go-between. Convinced of the honesty of my journey, Jackson wrote, she freely offered me her friendship and assistance, which preordained my success. The selection of Lizane as a companion was sheer dumb luck. Jackson had heard that a wagon loaded with merchandise was to head into the mountains. Lizane was a passenger and had no objection to another woman climbing aboard. In the manuscript's version, Jackson lovingly describes the autumn morning of the trip's first day. She reminisces, "The first frosts had colored the leaves, ripened the apples, the persimmons, and the pawpaws, and had given a crisp tinge to every variety of mountain life." Jackson tells us that the initial leg of the journey was 60 miles into the mountains to Lizane's house, quote, "where I was made comfortable." The trip took 3 days. Lizane would take no money from Jackson for her keeping, though Jackson did pay for the white and bay mules to be used on their journey. The first house visited was Sister Marthy's, Lizane's sister, Martha Begley, 15 miles up a dry creek bed as there was no road. They were greeted by 2 boys whom Katherine describes as fatherless and were welcomed heartily. After a simple supper of corn-pone bread, bacon fat, and coffee, the singing began. Of course, the guests sang first and obtained their confidence, Jackson records. After some persuasion and assurance of friendship, the family unlocked its word hoard, and for 2 days we had a feast of song. As the host, Marthy held court most of the time, swaying back and forth in her low, straight chair, singing loudly and clearly. Jackson asked her hosts to sing the songs more than once, no doubt to transcribe them, remarking that they were glad to repeat them, and they seemed pleased by her interest. Ever the academic, Jackson noted, quote, "the usual landmarks of the ballads, rapidity, change from narrative to dialogue, alliteration, overflow, impure rhyme and assonance, many recurring phrases and epithets, frequent use of the numerals 3 and 7, a barbaric profusion of silver and gold, and always simple thought, direct and distinct, with that emphasis that springs from the need of expressing in a few words some deep passion. Martha and Lizaine sang Lord Thomas together, and when they sang Sweet William and Lady Margaret, Jackson was, quote, almost overcome with the transport of the centuries. Sweet William arose one May morning, and dressed himself in blue. Oh, tell unto me that long, long love that's between Lady Margaret and you. Indeed, the song invoked for her the presence of Chaucer, Shakespeare, the British Isle collectors John Dryden and Thomas Percy, Sir Walter Scott, and Queen Elizabeth. These were my invisible companions, she said later.